Part 105. Mysterious Journey. Author, Gunkai. Chapter 1045. What? Say it again. In the large library on the cliff, the woman in white who was sitting cross-legged suddenly floated into the air, her eyes opened, and two snow-white rays of light shot out from her eyes and disappeared instantly. The hard work of practicing the secret technique of witnessing for more than half a year was instantly wiped out. But the woman didn't feel any pity at all. Instead, she stared solemnly at the disciple in white who came to report. Your 10th Highness, the 5th Highness Rene rebelled against the family and has been arrested and taken back. Elder, please go to the meeting hall immediately to gather for a joint trial, the disciple in white replied coldly, without any emotion. Sister Rene. Betrayal. Impossible. The woman in white had a cold face, but her chest kept heaving, and she didn't believe what the other party said at all. This is the elder's order, the disciple in white replied coldly. Sister Rene went out 2 years ago and said she was settling a private matter, but there was no news after that. Now you suddenly tell me that she betrayed the family, the woman in white sneered. You're lying to me. She suddenly took action, her arms extended rapidly in an instant, and she grabbed her disciple's head with one claw. Bang! The white-clothed disciple's head was directly scratched and exploded, turning into countless metal parts. I hate people lying to me the most. Anyone who lies to me will die. The woman in white was excited and moved her palm down. With a sudden explosion, the entire white-clothed disciple's body exploded and turned into countless parts, splashing around and slowly melting. These parts are actually carved from ice. Your Highness Aloran, this is the elder's order. A voice slowly came from the only half of the head on the ground. Standing up in a hurry, the woman in white stepped on her head and her expression became even colder. I don't believe Sister Rene would do such a thing. She strode out of the room, her figure flashed and disappeared. Chixia Main Peak. Inquisition Hall. Human-shaped white sculptures hundreds of meters high stand around the entire hall. The ground is paved with ice and carved with rough and ancient patterns. The gaps between the sculptures are constantly blowing in the cold wind, which is as cold as tens of degrees below zero, making a whining sound like the roar of a ghost. This is the trial court, where all the sinners of the Chixia sect are dealt with. The white hall is filled with faint white light everywhere, like natural lighting. At this time, the originally deserted courtroom was filled with a large number of people sitting or standing. Sitting in the highest position are 3 white-haired elders with wrinkles on their faces. The 3 elders have different body types. The great elder was very fat, almost 5 meters wide, and looked like a mountain of flesh where he was sitting. The second elder seemed to have been sleeping. Even with his eyes closed, he couldn't tell whether he was really sleeping or pretending to be sleeping. The third elder is a dwarf, who looks like a child, but has a fierce look on his face, and his long white robe is enough to cover his whole body. Under the elders is a row of Sangzan disciples standing and looking down. Most of the Sangzan disciples are here. Except for those who are still in retreat or those who have not returned from going out, they are all here. Standing at the very front is Carthage, the legendary genius of the Scarlet Snow sect. He looks like an ordinary young man, with nothing ordinary, no aura of domineering, and no sharp aura of a master. He seems to be just a very ordinary man in his 20s, young, calm, and indifferent, and seems to be interested in something. Not interested at all. He was neither handsome nor outstanding, and he was dressed in white. If he hadn't been standing at the top of the 3 hearts, he would have been able to blend into the crowd and not be able to find out who he was. Behind him was a person wrapped in a white robe. His face could not be seen clearly, but his figure was vaguely that of a woman. The third position is vacant. Eva has not returned since she went out. She is still doing errands in the outer space and has no time to come back. The fourth one is also vacant, and the fifth one is Rene. But at this time, Renee's hair was disheveled and her body was stained with blood, and she was kneeling at the bottom of the hall, facing the three elders. There was no special emotion on her old face, just calmness. A big red bird was tied to her body like a rope, binding all her consciousness and skills. Renee, Renee, you have always been calm and sensible, how could you really do such a thing? The second-ranked man in white robe with 3 hearts said in a low and sad voice, with a clear and sweet voice. Sister, I broke the rules of the sect and passed on the secret eye seed to outsiders. It was my fault. Renee is willing to be punished. Renee glanced at the man in white robes and replied calmly. Ice dense species. As soon as these words came out, the people within the Chixu sect who had gathered around them exploded with a buzz. Renee raised her head and slowly looked around. Most of them were shocked looks, some were pitiful, and some were angry. After all, the Ice secret seed is the strongest insight left by the ancestors and masters of the past generations that can only be found in the Ice Hell. The loss of one is equivalent to reducing the entire Red Snow sect's uniqueness. Powerful insights. This is to the detriment of everyone. She saw her friends standing in Sanshong arguing quietly, looking at her with anger mixed with worry from time to time. Whoosh! A white shadow instantly fell into the ranks of the 3 hearts. Surprisingly, it was the 10th Aloran, this friend who had been stationed to guard the cliff library all year round, who actually left the library at this time and stood in Sangzan with a cold face. In the buzzing noise of the hall, Renee saw Alolan saying something excitedly to the second elder, but the teacher made no movement and seemed to be asleep. All the sounds seemed to be echoing in her head, and Renee suddenly felt extremely tired. She has been searching for most of her life, and this result may be the retribution she should have had. Everything seems to be destined to be unable to resist. Humph. It has been many years since the Ice Seed. Losing 1 Ice Seed is equivalent to reducing the unique ice inheritance of our Red Snow section. I propose that Renee be sentenced to death, Great Elder, he said coldly. The bloated body echoed with a metallic sound, which was very strange. Families have rules, families have family laws, and the country has national laws. As a sect, we are more powerful than the country, so we must have laws. Otherwise, once exceptions are made, everyone will take chances. Then the entire sect will not be the same. What's going on? The third elder also spoke, his voice as sharp as a child's, with a hint of coldness and cruelty. Just listening to the voice made people's hair stand on end. He stood on the elder's seat and sneered sinisterly, shuddering. So, I also agree to impose the death penalty. Not only the death penalty, but also all the criminals she implicated must be hunted down to death. Eliminate all hidden dangers. Second brother, what do you think? The voices of the 2 people instantly overwhelmed the sound of the entire hall, as if they were soundproofed. When everyone spoke, they suddenly found that their throats were silent. In the trial court, a layer of white light curtain slowly covered the sky above the main hall, forming a circular disc that rotated slowly. When the elder spoke, everyone suddenly fell silent. Everyone's attention was focused on the second elder. Both elders had a clear attitude, but the second elder, the strongest among the 3, was the most important. The second elder of Carthage opened his eyes and his eyes fell on the first person of Sangzan. What do you think? Carthage looked indifferent. In fact, as Renee was one of his star generals, he naturally did not want the other party to fall. The meaning of the teacher's question to him was also obvious. The other 2 elders focused their gazes and looked at Carthage. Several Sangzan disciples were already divided into 2 groups. One side was in favor and the other was opposed. They were tit for tat. At this time, their eyes also fell on Carthage. Everyone also understands that since defeating the senior sister of the Bluefrost sect, the number 1 person with 3 hearts has entered an unfathomable level of strength. With his level, it is only a matter of time before he becomes an elder. I believe that sin does not lead to death. Carthage spoke slowly, his voice calm. Nothing unexpected. The great elder snorted fiercely, expressing his dissatisfaction. The third elder stared sharply at Carthage, inserting his hands into each other's sleeves, making a faint hissing sound. But Carthage suddenly spoke again. If you reveal the treasure of the sect, your power should be abolished. Suppress the ice hell forever and suffer the pain of being eaten by thousands of insects. In an instant, the entire hall was silent. Both the three elders and all the three disciples and onlookers were stunned by Carthage's addition. All insects eat your heart, this is a punishment worse than death. Only the most heinous criminals in the faction would use this kind of punishment to torture each other. Senior brother, you, the 10th Aloran showed a trace of uncontrollable anger on his face. She understands that if Carthage wants to control the faction, it must stand upright and safeguard the interests of everyone. Otherwise, losing everyone's support will not be worth the loss for him. But as a companion of Xingpai, her mood at this time was simply incomprehensible. Oh, I stick to my opinion, the second elder sighed slowly. As he closed his eyes again, an invisible force field slowly emanated from his body. Huh! It was like a breeze blowing on the face, with the second elder as the center. A huge and invisible force enveloped the entire hall, covering everyone inside. I object, the elder snorted coldly, and slapped the armrest of the seat hard with his palm the size of a cattail leaf fan. Boom! The same invisible force field erupted violently, squeezing out 1/3 of the space in the entire hall. I object too, the third elder also laughed sharply, and his body emitted a third force field invisible. Once again, part of the hall space was squeezed out. But to everyone's expectation, the two of them could barely protest against the second elder, and even worse. The second elder, who was squeezed into the field, narrowed his eyes slightly, and another force field burst out from his body. The huge pressure was as fierce as a tsunami. Call. Everyone in the hall actually faintly heard the sound of the cold wind howling and snowflakes flying. Just relying on the force field coverage alone, the second elder actually reached a point where it was close to substantial influence. It was simply terrifying. Some disciples with low skill levels had begun to feel difficulty breathing and stiff bodies at this time. They hurriedly retreated tens of meters and left the main hall, and then relaxed. The disciples with stronger skills resisted fiercely, their faces turned pale, and it was obvious that they could not last long. Mysterious Journey. Author, Gunkai. Chapter 1046. The expressions of the first elder and the third elder changed slightly, and they exchanged glances, each feeling horrified. This old guy's strength has improved again. The judgment this time will be as I said. The second elder slowly opened his mouth. Teacher, you were wrong this time. At this moment, a dull voice slowly sounded. Boom! The violent fourth force field actually erupted ferociously in the gap between the three non-falling force fields. It's Carthage. His hair actually burned faintly, as if a layer of light red flame was ignited on his hair, but it did not spread at all. His force field was embedded tenaciously and firmly into the force fields of the two elders, like the last weight on the scale, turning the original disadvantage into an advantage again. Little by little, he compressed the second elder's force field. The second elder's eyes suddenly widened, and he stared quietly at Carthage, the disciple he had single-handedly trained. This was the first time that he couldn't understand this child who had always been humble and polite. Since the sect has rules, teacher, in order not to chill all the disciples, the punishment for Renee should really be listened to by senior brother. Once suddenly a calm figure appeared in the ranks of the three hearts, standing directly in the 12th position. This calm figure was actually able to speak slowly with three unshakable auras, and his voice fell clearly into everyone's ears. Garen. You, Aloran in white mustered up all his strength and managed to make his voice come out. He immediately looked at Garen with a calm face in shock. Compared to the other party's calm and relaxed voice transmission skills, her effort immediately revealed the gap in skills between the two. At this time, Garen was wearing the same three-hearted white clothes, with a blue scimitar hanging on his waist, and his eyes were calmly looking at his teacher, the second elder. He glanced at Renee, who had a dead expression on her face, and a trace of pity and guilt flashed in her eyes. When he turned around, his eyes and Carthage's eyes officially met for the first time. The first genius and the second genius of the Chixu sect finally met officially for the first time. Both parties may have known each other more or less through different channels, but this was the first time they met like this. Carthage's expression was dull and he was not moved at all by Garen's appearance. Garen smiled slightly. In the main hall, the force fields were violently rubbing against and colliding with each other. Every minute and every second, the three elders and Carthage were violently consuming terrifying skills, and there were also martial arts realms at the mirror level that were clashing with each other. Time passes bit by bit. Finally, the second elder closed his eyes tiredly. The moment he retracted his force field, the great elder and third elder Carthage also retracted their own force field and regained their composure. Take Renee to heavy water prison. The third elder's high-pitched voice sounded again. He looked at Carthage and Garen with admiration. As expected of the second disciple, they both understand the overall situation and consider the overall situation not bad. Suddenly two white armored guards appeared, picked up Renee, turned around and walked away. The second elder said nothing. The great elder simply laughed out loud with pride. This was the first time that the two of them had defeated the second child in a head-to-head confrontation. As Renee was carried down, some people sighed with regret, while others gloated, but more people, because they had nothing to do with them, were eye-opening at the scene of the confrontation between the bosses above them. Without the silent light curtain, the entire hall would have turned into a noisy vegetable market. When all the dust settled, the second elder disappeared from his seat silently. The other two elders looked at Carthage and Garan. You two are very good, he. The great elder laughed chubbily and disappeared instantly. The third elder followed and disappeared into the seat. Carthage nodded to Garen, turned around and flew into the air. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a red fire, shot away, and disappeared into the air. Only San Xian and his party were left on the field. Garen, you ungrateful thing, Alolan, the woman in white, rushed in front of Garen and punched him hard in the abdomen. Bang! The fist hits the target. An invisible force field exploded from Garen's back with a punch, and the invisible force cut the tray on a stone pillar in the main hall into two halves. The fruit chestnuts on top rolled to the ground. Garen allowed her to punch him in the stomach without moving. How did Sister Renee teach you back then? How did Senior Sister Eva put in a good word for you? Who settled the matter between you and Ron? Aloran cried. Even if I don't have much gratitude, I shouldn't harm her, she cried. Garen took a deep breath, and blood slowly overflowed from the corner of his mouth. Sister, this is no longer a personal matter. It was impossible for him to stand on Renee's side, and he heard the news just after he came out of seclusion. He also struggled for a long time before making this decision. He knew that this choice was destined to be looked down upon. But there's no way he'd give up his own advancement in the genre for Renee. He was grateful to Renee for guiding him and getting him started, but it was not important enough for him to give up something and give up his plan. He noticed that everyone looked at him with a hint of contempt. There was no distinction between grudges and grudges. Such a person could give up his friends once for the sake of justice, and he could give up a second time. No one wants to deal with such a person. Well. With a sigh, Garen turned around and left slowly. Renee gave him pointers on the fusion of martial arts realms. He had just merged into his own resonance crystal when he received the news of Renee's trial. He was shocked and hurried out of seclusion. But I didn't expect the consequences to be so serious. Night. Heavy water prison. In a prison similar to a water prison, in a separate cell deep in the depths, Renee's hair was disheveled, and her lower body was soaked in an extremely dark mercury-like liquid. These liquids are extremely corrosive and are constantly eroding her skills and body, making a subtle hissing sound that makes people stand on end. The faint moonlight shone in from the only window above her head, and Renee stood in the moonlight beam, looking up at the night sky, motionless. "Sister." Suddenly a voice came from the window. Garen's face appeared in the window, staring down at Renee. "You clearly made a breakthrough, why didn't you escape?" As the pinnacle of inheritance level and the realm of silver mirror martial arts, if you want to escape, no one can catch you except the elders and senior brothers. There was silence. Renee didn't answer, just lowered her head and stood calmly in the heavy water. "Elder brother has sent people to hunt down the child you gave the ice seed," Garen said softly. Suddenly, Renee's body below shook slightly. Garen shook his head helplessly, slowly opened the window, used a rope to put down a basket of food and fruits, and retracted the rope. He looked at senior sister Renee again. Still motionless and unresponsive, he let the food basket float on the heavy water beside him. After closing the window, Garen turned around and slowly walked out of the Chongshui prison, heading back up the dark underground stone tunnel. A large stone tunnel like a castle tunnel, with burning torches that can burn for 1,000 years stuck on the walls on both sides, and the orange-yellow firelight keeps making a hissing sound. The yellow firelight reflected the swaying shadow of Garen. The tunnel spirals upward continuously. There are no other steps, and it is all flat and sloped ground for easy transportation of things. Suddenly, two tall men in white walked down from above. Among the two people, the man on the left was wearing a three-hearted crystal shoulder armor, with a thick cloak hanging straight down behind him, which was extremely conspicuous. Garen has already memorized all the information on the three hearts. He recognized who the Sanshin was at a glance. He tilted his head slightly. "Senior brother Missy isn't listening to the teachings from the third elder, so why are you here so late?" The person who came was none other than Msu Ehui, the 8th rank senior executive. No one knows his last name, everyone knows that he is called Miss. This man with a long face has exactly the same personality as the third elder, cunning and suspicious. Miss smiled faintly. "I came here to be in the same class as senior sister Renee, and came to see her for the last time. I just don't know why junior brother Garen came here. He looks like a very thin and gentle young man, but if he hadn't done a few big things that made everyone see his real background, no one would think that he is a cunning person. This face is the most deceptive." "Whatever you do, I do." Garen smiled and replied calmly. The two passed each other. Suddenly the girl stood still and turned her head slightly. "I heard that Chi Swexing had a spy sneak in the night before yesterday. I wonder if junior brother Jia Long found any clues." "I have been in seclusion, and I just came out and found nothing," Garen replied with a faint smile. "If you have any news, you must inform me first." Miss also smiled. "As a general law enforcement officer, I can handle many things in a logical manner, and it's much easier, don't you think?" Garen opened his mouth, but suddenly he felt a sharp force field coming from behind, like some kind of hidden weapon flying at high speed. "Call." The force field behind him was moving, and the powerful invisible force field appeared slightly for a moment, blocking the sharp force field. G. Amidst the sharp friction sound, the two force fields violently impacted together, rotating and rubbing violently. A strong air current erupted from between Galen and Myth. It washed over the walls on both sides, making the torch hiss continuously, as if it might be extinguished at any time. Neither of them took action directly, but the chi machine force fields belonging to the fusion resonance crystal core of the martial arts realm clashed instantly. Ouch! A dark giant wolf slowly appeared next to Garen. It was not an entity, but an inexplicable natural form naturally formed by chi. A black spider slowly crawled across Mai's shoulder. The corners of his mouth curved. The energy between the two people disappeared without a trace in an instant. The patter of footsteps gradually faded away, heading down. Garen stood there, paused for a moment, and the black wolf at his feet automatically collapsed and disappeared. He remained expressionless, suppressed the smile on his face, and continued walking up. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Mysterious Journey. Author, Gunkai. Chapter 1047. The night was extremely dark, and the black cloud slowly covered the moon, leaving only a tiny gap to project the white beam of moonlight. Chixyuxing Heavy Water Prison is located directly below the central tribunal. There is only one passage around it, which is a straight passage from the outer area where His Highness Three Hearts lives. This road, from the outermost 15 halls to the innermost first hall, is the residence of the Chixyu Star headquarters assigned to all Sangzan disciples. It is also the only way to defend the headquarters from foreign enemies. There are 15 halls in total. The Tao Villa Palace represents 15 different levels of defense. However, the ranking of the Three Hearts is not necessarily based on strength. Some are ranked low, but their strength is not bad, and they stay in their positions just because they have not officially challenged for a higher position. The entire Chixyu headquarters, centered on the tribunal of Chixyu's highest peak, is shaped like a huge nail, with the tip of the nail being the entrance to the 15th collar. The rest of the surrounding area is covered with snow for thousands of miles and sparsely populated. The Elder's different seasonal realms, as well as the Cliff Library, are far to the right of this place. It can only be reached instantly by jumping and teleporting. At this time, white snow was flying at the entrance gate of the 15th hall. The entrance to the huge white building complex was the huge gate of the 15th hall, which was 162 meters high. The snow-white ice gate looks like a polar iceberg that has never melted for thousands of years. The lower part is almost condensed with the ground and blends into one. This door has not been opened for hundreds of years. Everyone has either teleported or leaped from above, and no one has ever walked through here. But at this moment, this huge 100-meter gate finally welcomed its first visitors in hundreds of years. 3 young people were standing in front of the giant door, looking up at the ice-covered door that was hundreds of meters long. They are not invited guests of the Chixyu sect, so they are naturally not qualified to fly in. They will be instantly defeated by the huge defense system, and they are not qualified to use the teleportation device to instantly jump in. So we can only find a way through the entrance on the ground. Is the old woman locked up here? The blond boy standing at the front had a solemn face and was dressed in a simple gray cloth. His arms and wrists showed traces of being wrapped in circles by white bandages. He was not tall, but the black heavy sword carried on his back gave him a simple sharpness. If you want to rescue Renee, the only way is to pass through this gate. A voice in the void slowly sounded. Hongguo, this is the first test level. The first one, the blond boy frowned. In other words, there are many more after that. Let's talk about it together, there will always be a way. You have the information provided by Fatty. You should know that the Chixyu sect, as one of the schools of energy masters, is one of the most powerful existences in the entire galaxy. The voice spoke again. So, you must first find a way to pass through this giant gate, and then you are qualified to enter it and face the 15 defensive levels inside. Are the 15 strongest members of the Chixyu sect, the young man Hongguo spat. As soon as the saliva fell on the ground, it froze into ice cubes and made a crisp sound. This is too difficult. A weak young man among the 3 looked embarrassed. We have only been exposed to energy weapons for less than a year. Turn around and go back if you're afraid. The third person was a girl, with a bright golden short hair already covered with a thick layer of white snowflakes. She had a cold face and an indifferent expression, as if nothing could move her. There is a dagger tied to each side of his hands, and he is dressed in a tight t-shirt and white tight jeans. He looks very capable, fully revealing his good figure and slender legs. Now that we have come here, can we go back? Hongguo said calmly. I don't know how strong the three hearts inside are, but there will always be a way to solve the difficulties. If you stop moving forward because of fear, then at the beginning you shouldn't have come in here. The weak young man lowered his head and clenched his fists. We will die together, the blonde girl said calmly. Courage is worthy of commendation, but by the way, I am bringing you here because if you can really open this road, then the Chixu sect will give those who can open this road a chance to fulfill their wishes. The voice sounded again, and it was impossible to distinguish between male and female. Oh! Any wish can be made. Hongguo's eyes suddenly lit up. Any wish is acceptable. Hey hey! Hongguo's eyes were fixed on the 100-meter giant door in front of her. She laughed strangely, and slowly drew out the black épée behind her. Inside Chixu headquarters, the biting cold wind brought snowflakes flying and falling continuously. In a small courtyard, the mysterious young man who had just entered the house with Baiye was currently holding a rapier and standing quietly in his small courtyard with 15 collars. There is a masked man in white guarding his safety in each of the 4 directions to prevent anyone from disturbing him. The wind and snow slid down around him, but not a single bit accumulated on his head and shoulders. He was just assigned to the 15th territory of His Highness the 15th, and he didn't feel tired for a moment. He immediately went to the cliff library to get a secret book to practice. Speaking of which, it's really not easy to sneak into this place. No one noticed that this mysterious young man with thick eyebrows and big eyes was silently communicating with a certain existence in himself. As long as you successfully enter, there will always be a chance to enter the ice hell. Don't worry, as long as nothing happens, the Red Snow sect will definitely focus on training you and that boy with an extreme winter physique, and will not slack off at all. A demon, the voice came into his mind. It was neither male nor female, but it seemed to have the slightest accent. After all, your talent gene is the blood of the legendary white dragon. As a fantasy dragon species that masters ice, there is no room for the top management of Chixu sect to ignore it. When the critical moment comes, as long as you find the right time, you can take action quietly. The young man smiled slightly. Chi. The rapier in his hand suddenly thrust forward, shooting a bright white light in the wind and snow, straight and long-lasting, like a slender beam of light. Click. Suddenly, there seemed to be a subtle cracking sound coming from a distance. The sound was small and faint, but it was impossible to ignore. The mysterious boy was stunned for a moment, then turned to look in the direction from which the sound came. What sound? His level 5 consciousness exploded with all its strength, turning into a white light and shooting out, heading straight towards the source of the sound. The straight and slender white light suddenly emitted pure light, illuminating everything in its path clearly. White light swept across rows of sparse buildings, illuminating each faction member who was startled by the sound and walked out of the building. These people were carefully selected from the outside world and selected the best humans on Chixu planet to work here. Over hundreds of years, a perfect and self-sufficient inheritance has gradually been formed, and generations have lived in this huge territory without ever changing. At this time, there were sounds at night, which had never happened in hundreds of years. The white beam shot out for thousands of meters, directly illuminating everything in its path. The mysterious boy suddenly showed an expression as if he had seen something interesting. As expected. Just before he finished speaking. Boom! Accompanied by the sound of countless glass shattering, the giant door that had never been opened in the distance opened a huge gap in an instant on this dark night. Countless ice jets fell from the cracks and hit the houses and streets on the ground. The people who were close below let out panicked screams, rolled and crawled and ran away in the distance. Shouts, sirens, shouts, and the wails of being hit by huge heavy ice were all drowned out by the huge roar, appearing and disappearing. Interesting. Really interesting, The young man held the rapier upside down, and the smile on his face was in sharp contrast to the protectors around him who had lost their cool. Just after walking out of the prison, Garin turned his head and looked in the direction where there was a huge roar in the distance. That giant door that was said to have never been opened for hundreds of meters, that almost everyone thought was abandoned, actually opened this night. Standing at the door of the prison, Garin gently held the handle of the blue scimitar and closed his eyes. He opened his eyes again and walked quietly towards the direction of the 12 territories where he lived. Behind him is the huge, tall, and sharp red snow-peaked tribunal. Within the first collar, in the middle of the desolate snow-white first territory, Carthage sat cross-legged in the snow. There was nothing around him. There were no buildings, only the remains of buildings buried underneath by the heavy snow. Standing in front of him was the second person, the mysterious woman wrapped in a white robe, who was also Renee's sister Alice. Alice is a very common and popular name, but when used on this woman, no one thinks it is common. As the original top master of the Red Snow sect and the supreme leader of Uehui, Alice has been in the Red Snow sect for who knows how long, maybe hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years, no one knows. She is one of the earliest disciples of the entire Chixu section. There have been many genius-level figures in the past, but as those figures either left or died, she still remained at Uehui's leader position without any change. Every time a talented junior brother came up from behind, she was always willing to give up the first place and settle for second place. No one knew what she was thinking, and no one knew what she looked like. At this time, Alice only revealed a pair of light blue slender eyes, quietly staring at Carthage sitting cross-legged on the snow. "Did you hear that? The trial door has been opened," her sweet voice came from under the mask. "So what?" Carthage said calmly. But he didn't even open his eyes. "What would you do if they could come to you?" Alice asked calmly. "What do you want me to do?" Carthage opened his eyes, and there seemed to be dark whirlpools in his eyes. Those eyes met Alice's. A trace of invisible force field slowly spread, and the atmosphere was slightly solidified. Mysterious Journey. Author, Gunkai. Chapter 1048. Spread out. Under the trial gate, 3 shadows suddenly dispersed through the gate, each shooting in one direction. "Remember to meet at Hall 15. A sound transmission was instantly transmitted from Hungwo to the ears of the other 2 people. The 3 of them seemed to be very familiar with the terrain of Chixu headquarters, and disappeared into the alleys after a few leaps. For the residents living in the Chixu headquarters, most of them have not used force for many years. Faced with this situation, only a few security teams are still searching around, and more people are hiding in their homes to wait for the matter to pass. As a result, the 3 of them reached the entry point of the 15th hall directly without encountering any decent obstacles in the vast residential area. The cost was just to defeat a few waves of accidentally encountered security team members, with the highest combat effectiveness of a 3rd-level weapon master. They were easily solved. The 3 of them landed at the gate of the 15th hall and pushed open the wooden red door. Inside was the residence of His Highness Sangzan, the 15th rank stationed at the headquarters. The wind and snow got heavier and heavier, and the moonlight was obscured by the thick clouds, but not even a bit leaked out. "No one? What's going on?" Hongguo held the épée tightly, and when he walked in, he didn't see a single figure inside. "It's better to leave quickly. Maybe we are lucky enough to meet the master when he goes out," the frail young man suggested with some fear. The 2 of them had no objection, quickly found the teleportation jump point and stood in it. The jump point that was supposed to be locked was now unlocked and lit up. Hiss. The 3 of them disappeared on the jumping platform instantly. None of them noticed that in the darkness, a figure slowly walked out and watched them jump away quietly without making any sound. Without any surprise, the 15 leaders passed. After a fierce battle, the 14th leader Baiye was defeated with level 4 strength. There was no one in 13 territory at this time. In Chongshui prison. Senior sister. Let me rescue you. The prison window was opened, and a stream of white light shot in, accurately breaking the shackles on Renee's body. Alolan jumped in, splashing into the heavy water. Renee's appearance was extremely haggard at this time, and her already emaciated figure was even more frail, as if she could be blown over by a gust of wind. Alolan, don't waste your efforts. I made a big mistake and deserve to be punished. She said slowly. Stop talking. I'll take you out. Alolan didn't allow her to say anything, and drew stroke-like lines with silky hands. A large number of white lines were complicated and intertwined, getting bigger and bigger, more and more, rapidly. Transformed into a big white bird as tall as a man. Gently placing Renee on the white bird's back, a white mark suddenly lit up between Alolan's brows. Zero-line traction. Go, she suddenly summoned her consciousness and pointed at the white bird's head. Grumble. The white bird chirped, fluttered its wings and flew straight to the window above the head, and rushed out of the prison in a few clicks. Snap, 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 snap. Suddenly, a clear sound of applause came from outside the prison. A bloody figure walked out of the shadows outside the prison, revealing the face of a sinister man with a hooked nose. It's a really good plan to use a few cannon fodder to attract everyone's attention, but you are guarding yourself and letting the key criminals go. Angora Aloran was startled, and the figure that was about to leave stopped instantly, staring at the other party with his eyes. You let a key criminal go without permission, and you also colluded with outsiders to attack the headquarters. 10th Aloran, what crime do you deserve? Angola showed a manic smile. How about I help you catch the criminal and reduce his crime? Before he finished speaking, Angora suddenly turned into a blood shadow and rushed towards the exit above. Don't even think about it. Aloran floated into the air, white lines erupted from his body, and he rushed toward Angola in all directions. 6 Angoras, let's fight it out. A giant white bird slowly appeared beside her, raising its head and making a long and sharp cry. Chirr. The big white bird carried Renee and flew toward the darkness in the distance. There seemed to be a thin veil of darkness around it, covering its entire body in white, completely hiding it in the darkness. The big bird passed over a large group of buildings and passed through the first collar, the second collar, and the third collar. Chi! A red beam of light shot straight into the sky from below, facing the big bird's head, and was about to blow it to pieces in an instant. Before the attack came, the powerful force field attack and oppression caused the big bird's body to collapse slightly, and it might fall apart at any time. Big blizzard punch. A violent aura shot up and turned into a white beam of light, smashing the red light and resolving the crisis. The scattered fragments of red and white light scattered like fluorescent snowflakes, which was extremely beautiful. In the snow below, a tall, strong and terrifying figure suddenly appeared, as if jumping out of thin air. Yaoling, you're here too. The strong figure made a deep male voice and looked into the darkness not far away. Aren't you here too? A mummy-like figure wrapped in white cloth walked out of the darkness. Her exposed skin had no trace of epidermis at all, and the red muscles underneath could be seen, which was very oozing. Attack the headquarters at night and rescue the wanted criminal. This is a serious crime, the strong man said in a low voice, stretched out his index finger, and a red beam of light stretched and contracted like a laser on his fingertips, making a harsh hissing sound. You know, Jing Mao, I've wanted to fight you since 10 years ago, but I didn't expect to have the chance until now. Yaoling laughed sharply. I've always wanted to know, what qualifications do you have to be ranked 4th? Qualification? It seems you want to die. A huge force field expanded from Jing Mao's body, turning into a big white cat with a red poisonous snake on its tail, lying next to him. The sound of rapid footsteps running through the snow. The sound of leather boots digging into the snow continued rhythmically. A black shadow below quickly chased the big white bird in the sky. The mysterious young man who had just started, His Highness 15th Third Heart, looked up at Rene in the sky with a trace of greed on his lips. The extremely weak inheritance level peak. If only the greed in his eyes almost turned into reality. However, a giant figure made him give up this idea instantly. It was a big fish hanging in mid-air. It was all white and covered with spikes. It was as fat as a ball. The whole ball fish was 4 to 5 meters in diameter. It had two big round eyes that were blinking and floating. He stared at the big white bird flying in mid-air. "Thank you for your hard work, little one." Caillou actually opened his mouth to speak, nodding towards the mysterious boy below. "This test counts as your joining Xingpai." The young man chuckled, dodged into the darkness, and ran toward his location as fast as he could. Rene lay on the back of the white bird and looked at the ball fish with a wry smile. "Old 11, why are you doing this? This is a crime I committed myself, and I have to bear it alone." "What are you talking about? I have to believe everyone. I believe that the senior brother will not really want to keep you." Ballfish puffed out a bubble from his nose and whispered. "But if this happens, everyone will be implicated by me." Rene smiled bitterly. "It doesn't matter, just sleep. You'll be fine after a nap. You're too weak now. If you keep pushing forward, you'll hurt your origin." Another bubble popped out of the fish's nose, and it quickly grew in size, directly covering Rene. The white bird finally slowly dispersed and disappeared in mid-air. The bubbles seemed to have a hypnotic effect. Holding Rene in them, she quickly closed her eyes and really fell asleep. The ballfish looked at Rene, who quickly floated away and shook his head slightly. "Although I am also from Yuhui, our friendship is not as good as yours. There are some things that cannot be violated on 11." Suddenly a calm voice suddenly sounded from directly below him. The pupils of Caillou's eyes shrank suddenly, and he looked down. A man who seemed ordinary but had an endless sense of presence was standing on the snow directly below him. "Carthage." He spoke slowly and bitterly. "In the remote leader's territory." The second elder slowly closed his eyes, let out a long sigh, stood up and left the monitored crystal wall. The huge ball fish body was frozen in the center by a huge block of ice, standing in the middle of the snow. The ball fish opened its eyes wide, and a complex mark gathered between the two short shark fins, but he himself and the unformed white mark were all frozen and sealed in the ice. Carthage pressed the sword with one hand and looked up at Rene, who was gradually walking away. With a slight jump, his figure actually spanned a distance of tens of meters in the blink of an eye, and appeared directly under the snow directly opposite Rene Bubble. Jumping again, he appeared in the air less than 10 meters away from Rene in the blink of an eye, reaching out to grab Bubbles directly. Zheng. His hand didn't catch Bubbles, but instead caught a silver scimitar. It was a magic knife with a handle burning with blue flames. A substantial circle of terrifying shock waves erupted from the exchange of hand-knife blows, instantly blowing up all the surrounding monitoring facilities. "You are..." Carthage's eyes, which had always been calm, changed slightly for the first time. What responded to him was a low and soft drink. Sunshine. In an instant, endless light enveloped him. It was endless blue light, blooming like the sun. Endless light and heat shone fiercely on Carthage. There is no dodge, and there is no way to dodge. In the flash of lightning, Carthage only had time to block his right hand in front of him. "What's going on? Why can't I see anything?" In the first elder's territory, the first elder and the third elder were sitting on huge chairs and watching the surveillance wall in front of them, but a sudden scene blew up all their monitors. "Someone deliberately destroyed the surveillance and wanted to get away from our surveillance." The third elder laughed sharply. "It seems that there are many things in the headquarters that we are not very clear about." "Why are you talking so much? Do you want to go and see for yourself?" The great elder was holding a large piece of shiny brown barbecue in his hand, which seemed to be the thigh meat of some huge creature. He bit into it and tore off a piece loudly. "Chew. We can't move, otherwise the second brother will definitely take action." Our purpose is to stay here to stop the second brother from breaking the rules. The third elder shook his head. Isn't that a bad show? The great elder was speechless. It doesn't matter, aren't there still 3 little guys? The third elder tapped his fingers slightly, and suddenly the scene on the other side of the 10-meter-high stone wall in front of him appeared directly. The 3 boys and girls who invaded the headquarters are now in the 8th hall, confronting the 8th-ranked girl. Mysterious Journey. Author, Gunkai. Chapter 1049. The 3 people were surrounded by icy blue light spots, pure blue light spots like elves. Under the illumination of this light spot, their movement speed seemed to increase. The injured wound will be instantly sealed with thin ice to stop bleeding. Miss is tall and thin, with a heavy look of ridicule on her face. Standing in the middle of the formation surrounded by 3 people. So weak he tilted his head and spoke briefly. An invisible and transparent force field emanated from his body. The force field expanded like smoke, grew larger and taller, and quickly formed a huge sphere more than 10 meters high. Tisk tisk tisk. Sharp burrs suddenly shot out around the ball. The entire sphere transformed into a giant force field spider in less than half a second. Call. One of the spider's front legs suddenly flashed in front of the short-haired girl like lightning. The latter had no time to react before he was hit and torn apart. That's not all. In the middle of the chest, a shocking bloody mouth slowly grew from thin to thick, then from small to large, almost splitting the entire chest in half. Puff. A stream of sticky blood spattered out instantly, and before it fell to the ground, it condensed into a sharp red crystal pillar. With a bang, the girl fell to the ground and fell into a coma. Kanan. Sister Nan. Honguo and the weak young man's minds went blank, but when they saw the girl falling, they rushed over there like crazy. Miss had no intention of stopping them at all, she just looked at the 2 of them like little ants with tears and snot pouring out all at once. She helped the girl up with fear, guilt, anxiety, and pain. He found it very interesting. Observing other people's emotions has always been his most interesting hobby, so he likes to wrap up his opponent bit by bit like a spider, trapping him bit by bit into despair, watching the opponent explode with all his strength, and finally reveal his despair. And angry, but unable to do anything about it. It was the intensity of emotion that fascinated him the most. It's so wonderful. Miss licked her lips greedily. It was this feeling that made him feel as if something delicious and thick was slowly being released from his heart. Endless aftertaste. Secret seed, it's on you, kid. Miss smiled and stared at Honguo. There was an aura about this kid that made him feel faintly afraid. Although I don't know how you integrated the ice seed, this will eventually be your lucky last place. Mize walked forward slowly, and the huge transparent force field spider beside him also moved forward with him, making a hissing sound of sharp airflow. I'll kill you, Honguo burst out wildly, suddenly rushed up, and slashed directly at Miss. He roared and integrated all his strength into the sword. Ah! Suddenly, half of the night sky in the distance suddenly lit up. The dazzling blue light was like a small sun, emitting a scorching and coquettish halo in the distance, like a halo hanging in the night sky. Mrs. eyes were slightly dazzled by the blue light, and her movements were slightly slower. When he raised his hand to block again, he suddenly found that the speed of the heavy sword suddenly increased by more than 10 times, and it was already in front of him in the blink of an eye. The last thing that caught my eye was the boy's strange blue eyes. Chi. I was careless. This was Mize's last thought as his consciousness fell into darkness. The blue light slowly dimmed, and 2 figures silently faced each other in mid-air. Who are you? Carthage jumped back a few steps, suspended in mid-air, and stared at the black-robed figure that suddenly appeared in mid-air. The other party's whole body was shrouded in a black robe, and the aura fluctuations around him seemed to be covered and confused with something special. It was simply a mess of disordered signals. From the appearance, it is impossible to tell what kind of school this person is, what identity he has, And what appearance he has. Carthage raised his right hand, his palm was burnt black and white smoke was still coming out. Regeneration. He spoke calmly. The palm of his hand immediately grew and healed rapidly. In less than 2 seconds, the black scar was lifted up by the new tender flesh underneath and fell off, restoring the rosy skin of his palm. It doesn't matter who I am, the man in black robe replied calmly. The important thing is that I am not a threat to your plan. No one could notice that cold sweat was constantly dripping from the vest under his black robe. What do you mean? Carthage narrowed his eyes slightly. That's what you understand. Do you think I will believe that a guy who has only been in the industry for less than 20 years can actually be so talented that he can reach the level of non-relegation in such a short period of time? Would such a top genius be willing to come to this remote place? The Scarlet Snow sect? Just because of what you said was the kindness of the second elder of the previous generation. The man in black robe said calmly. In other words, you are not a new disciple at all. You can rush from level 1 to level within 20 years. You are considered the top genius in the entire world of energy weapon masters. But it's a pity that you are not. You, the man in black robe said slightly. Said something sarcastically. Do you think I am right? My dear Lord Rain King. I cannot understand what you say. Carthage's pupils shrank slightly, and his left hand holding the sword hilt slowly tightened. Don't be nervous. The black-robed man's scalp was numb, and he felt an extremely terrifying energy locking him. He said in a calm tone, his voice low and strong. I have no intention of exposing you. I don't have the ability to expose this big game. Your purpose? Carthage asked calmly. Renee once saved me in the outside world, and I want to repay her favor. The man in black robe also answered calmly. I will do whatever it takes for this. Carthage didn't ask stupid questions like are you afraid that I will kill you? Since the other party dared to come, they must have made preparations elsewhere in advance. He just stared at the other person, trying to see through the black robe and see the face inside. The secret of the plan to subvert the Energy Master can be said to be that except for the participants and the top commander, no one will know about this huge chess game. He couldn't figure out where the other party got the news about this plan. It can't be someone from the Red Snow section. No one here can withstand my blow and remain so calm, unless it's the Monster Guardian. But that monster couldn't talk nonsense to me over such a trivial matter. If it were him, he could get rid of himself with an impatient slap. Carthage's mind was spinning rapidly, denying every guess. Let's go. Finally, Carthage's left hand gripped the hilt of the sword and finally loosened it. Thank you. Don't worry, I will never leak any information. This is the general trend and no one can stop it. After the man in black robe finished speaking, he grabbed the bubble containing Renee with one hand, turned around and flashed across dozens of meters, appearing in mid-air in the distance. Then there was another quick flash, and he used a short-range space jumper again and jumped suddenly. After a few seconds, it disappeared into the dark night in the distance. Seeing the man in black robe leaving, Carthage's hand on the sword hilt tightened slightly, but he still did not make a move. The blow that the opponent just unleashed was no less powerful than his own casual attack. Coupled with his casual attitude, there was a 30% chance that the opponent was a master of the same level as himself. Once there was a stalemate, exposing the plan would not be worth the gain. Once exposed, it may not have much impact on the big plan, but he will definitely die here. It seems we need to get them there as soon as possible. It wasn't until the dim light of the bubbles completely disappeared in the night sky that Carthage slowly turned around and gently threw a black ball in his hand. The ball instantly expanded and turned into a dark square channel. When Carthage walked in, the passage suddenly disappeared, and there was no sound except for the traces left by the two forces. Far, far away on the snowy night. Puff! The man in black robe slowly untied his robe. His whole body was covered with blood, blood vessels burst, and blood holes of different sizes exploded in his skin. The flesh and bones were not only squirming, but also violently trying to close the wounds. But it was resisted by some powerful force. So strong. A veteran master who never fails to level up. As expected, his reputation is well deserved, and he almost killed half of my life. Garen looked at his miserable state with a wry smile. The physical injury is not the most important thing. After all, there are enough potential points to repair it. The most troublesome thing is the magic weapon Sunshine. This time it seemed that it had finally erupted, and the blue flames inside were finally completely consumed. Only then did Garen realize that the blue flames inside could also be completely consumed. At this time, Rieo was held in Garen's hand. The flames on the handle were gone, and it looked like an ordinary silver-white long sword. Relying on this magic sword, Garen was able to burst out in a short period of time with strength that was comparable to the level of immortality. With his resonance peak double moon level strength, without this magic sword, there is no way he could even think of confronting Carthage's attack. With his own strength, he can only deal with inheritance level masters at most. This is the only way. Putting Renee's bubble on the snow, Garen put on his black robe again and quickly disappeared into the night. Bubbles wrapped around Renee lay alone on the snow. A few minutes later, a figure exuding the smell of blood quickly approached from the darkness. It was Aloran, who had just escaped. Her whole body was covered in blood, and her original white dress was also torn here and there. One arm hung limply by her side, apparently broken by some external force. Renee. She saw the sleeping Renee in the bubble, rushed over, popped the bubble with her finger, and picked her up. That person's information was actually true. She recalled that she had suddenly received a letter from a man in black robe, and she just rushed over with the attitude of giving it a try, but she did not expect that the real Sister Renee was here. Looking around, the surroundings were empty and uninhabited snow. A dark rotating black hole was slowly opening in the air not far away. It was the jumping black hole. Apparently everything has been arranged. Aloran rushed over and used the energy mark to detect the jumping point of the black hole, and his face suddenly lit up with joy. It's a public star field. Without saying a word, she jumped straight into the black hole. Hiss. Amidst the subtle noise, the black hole slowly shrank and disappeared, and finally turned into a bit of black light, which suddenly dispersed in the air. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Mysterious Journey. Author, Gunkai. Chapter 1050. 5 days later. Jump Reception VIP Hall. Garen took the initiative to greet the jump ship exit. With a hint of a smile, Eva hurriedly walked out of the bridge entrance, escorted by several escorts. Sister, you are finally back. What have you been doing the past few days? Eva looked at Garen calmly and asked. I'm in retreat, and I happen to have some new ideas, and I plan to test my feasibility, Garen replied with a smile. Snapped. The hall suddenly became silent, and the eyes of the guards and other senior officials of the Chixu sect who came to greet them all focused on the two of them. All kinds of dull, shocked, puzzled, and excited eyes were cast over. Garen stood in the middle, looking sideways at Senior Sister Eva in front of him. The left side of his face was slightly swollen, red, and somewhat congested from the severe slap. You disappoint me so much. There was a trace of tears in Eva's eyes, and she shook her head in pain. Garen touched his face, and a sharp pain was still irritating his skin. Senior Sister, you mean that I should bend the law for personal gain and protect my personal relationship and help? Garen actually smiled again. Eva was speechless. She was silent for a moment, then suddenly pushed Garen away and walked away with her guards. From now on, you are no longer my younger brother, Eva Reghar, and I cannot afford it. Her last voice came from afar. Garen only felt his cheeks hurting more and more, and his head was a little dizzy. there was still a trace of force field power left in the brain that was seriously injured by Carthage and had not been completely eliminated. Now he was hit hard by Eva's slap. Although he didn't use his consciousness, the physical power of the top resonance level was already very terrifying. After this slap, if it were a low-level energy master, his head would be turned into a rotten watermelon in an instant. He touched the left side of his face and sighed inwardly. He was unwilling to violate his own moral principles of clear grudges, but he was also unable to expose his true actions. In the coming great changes, only by actively siding with Carthage can we get the most benefits possible. Especially the large troops that will arrive in the 3 major cities soon. That scary man. The biggest key to their plot is that if they can get a share of the pie, they will be most likely to not only escape from this great change, but also to maximize benefits and growth. Be as prepared as possible for the future. There is too little time, Garen murmured in a low voice, turned around and left the reception hall. Originally he came here to explain something to senior sister Eva, but now it seems that with her impulsive personality. Since Renee was rescued, the 3 boys who broke in seem to have been let go on their own initiative by the people within the faction. When everything was settled, with the tacit approval of the second elder and his group, the matter was dropped. No one knew how much the second elder paid to suppress this matter. But everyone can see that he is in a very good mood at this time. Time passes slowly. Everyone seemed to have deliberately forgotten this matter, and no one mentioned it again. The headquarters of the Red Snow sect has once again restored its original quiet and peaceful environment. Everyone is practicing hard, traveling everywhere, and those who like to go to the void battlefield simply stay inside. Garen's behavior in this matter was also recognized by the first elder and third elder, but more importantly, it was recognized by senior brother Carthage. Successfully got closer to him. Although this matter caused dissatisfaction among many senior brothers, due to the authority of the senior brother, it was left alone and no one dared to raise any objections. Originally, Garen planned to continue practicing quietly until the school competition in 3 years' time. But something Carthage arranged for him forced him to interrupt his retreat and prepare to set off. Black Wolf Collar. A young man with short white hair strode into the large manor in the center of the Black Wolf territory. He just walked in. Woo! Subtle wolf howls surrounded him from all directions. Black wolves, as strong and tall as buffaloes, slowly walked out of the darkness, their green eyes shining like lanterns. More than a dozen black wolves directly surrounded the white-haired man. The man's expression was indifferent, but his eyes couldn't help but shrink. Not scared, but shocked by the intensity of the terrifying force field lingering on these black wolves. I am Shishibe. I came here under the orders of senior brother to ask senior brother Helang to set out for assistance. There was no sound in the dark manor. It seemed that his voice did not reach the innermost part. The giant wolves around him began to slowly gather around him, and one black wolf even had saliva flowing from its mouth, with sticky drops falling to the ground. The air is also constantly filled with a fishy stench. I am Shishibe. I am here on the orders of my senior brother. I heard it, a voice interrupted his repetition. Come in. Baye breathed a sigh of relief. When he was still a disciple of Urkson, he had heard about the power of Brother Black Wolf. Now it seems that he is indeed well-deserved and not ordinary powerful. And several of my junior brothers and followers. Come in together. Garen's voice came from the deep darkness. Baye nodded, and the giant wolves around him quickly faded away, and then more than a dozen figures quietly followed behind him. Boss, this place is really amazing. It's much better than your bay garden, a strong man said with a grin. Be polite, Baye reminded in a low voice. I know, the strong man chuckled. The group of people walked quickly inside, passing through some dilapidated courtyards, corridors, rock eyries, small gardens, and then passed through an empty and somewhat dilapidated house. Soon we arrived at the deepest inner courtyard of the entire manor. The circular inner courtyard was dark, with only 4 green lights burning faintly and eerily, emitting a dim light. A tall and strong figure was sitting cross-legged on the flat ground between 4 lights. The ground seemed to be engraved with some mysterious special inscription, giving people an extremely uncomfortable feeling. Even the air felt a little oppressive. Baya took a deep breath, raised his hand to signal his men to stop, and stepped forward alone. "Senior brother Black Wolf, Senior brother asked me to come over and invite you to go to the Winter Star of the Four-Ring Star Alliance," he said loudly. "I already know." Garen opened his eyes and looked at the White Knight in front of him strangely. "A group of 10 of you are going to your family's ancestral land to search for hidden treasures. Is this your initiative, or is it the intention of Senior brother?" Baya lowered his head slightly and looked away from Garen. "It's my suggestion, and it's also what Senior brother means." Garen was silent for a moment and then spoke again. "The Four-Ring Star Alliance has escaped from the control of my mechanic master, do you understand?" "I understand," Baya nodded. "Even if you have an extremely winter physique, you went to the Hall of Ancestors and reached the current 5th level all at once. It's still a bit reluctant to go directly out of the range of non-energy weapon masters," Garen said lightly. He already felt that something was wrong in this White Knight. It was not that there was something wrong with others, but that there was a vague feeling of causality in him that was the same as his. This feeling is weird and wonderful. "That's why Senior brother asked me to come to you and ask for help." Baya lowered his head and said. "The extreme winter star is a Death Star." Garen sighed. "Go ahead and take one of my black wolves with you. He will take action if necessary." He waved his hand, and a giant wolf with an unusual shape slowly stepped out from behind him. This black wolf was a bit weird. It was different from ordinary giant wolves. It had 2 obvious muscles on each side of its body. It's like wings that haven't grown yet, very weird. Baya glanced at He Lang and suddenly felt a little creepy. The energy mark on the back of his head could not help but automatically alarmed and appeared, spinning crazily. This is a terrifying reaction that occurs when he encounters an extreme threat. Baya was a little shocked. Obviously, this giant wolf had the power to threaten his life. It was just a giant wolf belonging to Brother He Lang. After the energy weapon master of Naga Star enters the resonance level, the most powerful person is no longer the energy weapon, but himself. But now, not even the strongest energy weapon can actually pose such a powerful threat to myself, who is already at level 5. "Go. I will accompany you secretly if necessary." Garen closed his eyes and said softly. Baya lowered his head and exited respectfully, watching the giant wolf disappear into the darkness in the blink of an eye, quietly. He suddenly felt creepy. If there is such an enemy hiding in the darkness, and you can't even detect a breath, such an opponent is simply too terrifying. A group of people backed away for hundreds of meters before they dared to turn around and leave quickly. When they left the manor, the subordinates who were following Baya breathed a sigh of relief. They looked at each other and broke into a cold sweat. It is rumored that since Senior brother He Lang went into seclusion, his territory has become more and more deserted and lifeless. Even the intelligence systems that can operate automatically have been affected and have inexplicable malfunctions. Looking at the degree of desolation of this manor, the rumors should be correct. Baya took a deep breath and whispered. "Your Highness 14th Knight, what should we do now?" "Go back to Jiadongxing directly," Yuri, his confidant beside him, asked in a low voice. This was a red-haired woman with a long ponytail who had been following him since he left the family. She was as old as him and was a qualified girl he rescued during a wandering. Since Senior brother He Lang said he would accompany him, it must be right. "Let's set off directly." Baya, or the man now named Bai Shishi, said in a low voice, "It has been so many years since I left my hometown. It's time to go back." "When?" He breathed a long sigh of relief, as if he had seen the natural disaster when his family was destroyed. Garen sat quietly in the darkness. He calmly recalled the white-haired man from before, or should not be called a man, but just a child who had just escaped from the category of teenager. By 14th night, His Highness Sangzan, ranked 14th, is rumored to be an extremist who will do whatever it takes to pursue power. Born in the Jiedong family of the Four-Ring Star Alliance, after the Jiedong family was inexplicably destroyed, he managed to escape and became the only survivor. I am going back now with the reputation of Chixu sect. I am afraid it is not to hunt for treasure, but more to see if any relatives are alive. In other words, to find the whereabouts of my enemies. A thought flashed through Garen's mind. The most important thing is that this White Knight is still an indispensable member of the general trend. This time when I go to the Extreme Winter Star, I will meet Klin and the others. This is the key. Extreme Winter Physique. And it is also a century-old Extreme Winter Physique. It's rare to meet a genius. The troubled times are approaching, and two such geniuses and that mysterious boy suddenly appeared. Thinking of this, he sighed lightly. Two geniuses appeared at the same time. Is it really time for our Chixu sect to rise? He did not hide the sentence, but murmured it in a low voice. I have such geniuses under my command. I hope the more the better, don't you think? Junior brother. A dull voice came from the darkness behind Garen. Mysterious Journey. Author, Gunkai. Chapter 1051. I don't know when, Carthage's figure appeared behind Garen, looking calmly at the green lights. Why are senior brothers here in person? Garen stood up, turned around, and looked at Carthage who suddenly appeared behind him. I see ambition in your eyes, Carthage said lightly, ambition for power. This is why I accepted you. Garen's lips curled up slightly, but he said nothing, waiting for his next words. I heard that you have a magic sword, Carthage said suddenly. Garen was shocked, knowing that the other party was suspicious. A general who is able to sneak into the Chixu sect without losing rank cannot be a fool, and it is normal to have this suspicion. No one who is a skilled mechanic in this world will be fooled by simple tricks. Is this what you're talking about? Garen's expression remained unchanged, and the sun demonic sword suddenly appeared in his hand. It's just that the blue flame on top has now turned into a light yellow flame, which is much weaker than the original blue flame. The burning position was also changed from the handle to the tip. A flash of black suddenly flashed in Carthage's eyes, and at this moment, Garen's whole body seemed to be soaked in an ice spring, as if being stared at by a violent and cold contradictory giant eye, and his body suddenly stiffened. This appears to be a scan. This feeling is fleeting. The abnormality in Carthage's eyes soon disappeared. The trace of doubt deep in his eyes disappeared in an instant. I know all about your past. The Black Disk domain on your home planet, the Seventh Wind God General, right? Do you need me to help you settle it? No, as long as I have senior brother's support, Garen is already satisfied. Garen bowed his head humbly to show respect. He did not doubt that the other party would find out his past, which was not difficult for someone of his height. Come with me, Carthage said the last word and turned to leave. Okay, Garen nodded. Know that the test of Carthage is coming. His eyes fell on his attribute column. In the past 2 years of retreat, he spent a lot of potential points, and he directly improved his gene column to the point where it could no longer be improved. The large number of potential points that had just been obtained also decreased rapidly, falling back to only more than 500. The gene item also changed from the blood eagle directly into a swirling black mist, as if it was hatching something. It has been slow and motionless, and all the gene abilities disappeared in an instant. This black mist is also like a bottomless pit. No matter how many potential points I put into it, there was no movement at all. After Galleon wasted a lot of potential points and still had no movement, it didn't dare to move anymore, just waiting for it to show new changes. In the past 2 years, his manner has been infected by the slightest breath of death, and even the intelligence system cannot approach it for a long time. This is because of another reason. The red gem he got from the Abyss altar was actually fused with the golden crystal he got from Ron. To be precise, the golden crystal was swallowed by the red gem. The red gem that swallowed the golden crystal seemed to turn into an extremely tempting delicacy. Garen wanted to swallow it directly into his stomach more than once, but he resisted the urge. The strange thing is that this red gem gradually began to exude a strange dead atmosphere. It constantly corrodes everything around it, whether living or dead. Taking out the red gem from the space ring, Galleon quietly put it into his cuff and held it tightly with his hand. The special dead breath of this gem can perfectly cover up and disguise your own breath, making it impossible to detect it even if you don't fall down. With a flash of his body, Garen shot into the darkness following Carthage at top speed. The figures of the two people, one behind the other, kept flashing in the dark night. All the surveillance settings seemed to have found nothing and turned a blind eye to the two people. Carthage kept leaping and shooting from high-rise buildings on the roof, without using its ability to float, so such movements were more concealed. Garen kept jumping in an emergency, but he could barely keep up with him. Looking at the black figure in front of him, Garen felt more and more the terror of this Rain King General Carthage. Unexpectedly, not even the Lord Guardian noticed this guy in disguise sneaking into the school. The two kept jumping and quickly left the headquarters and entered the remote cold zone. On the dark white land of ice and snow, a white and transparent space vortex stood impressively. It was a jumping point, and it was unknown where it led. Carthage landed in front of the whirlpool and walked in slowly. Garen also dropped down and walked in. There was a sudden change in front of his eyes, and the light was overflowing, as if countless rainbows were passing by. In just a few seconds, Garen was already standing in a quaint and shabby white courtyard. Fallen leaves were flying and rustling overhead, and red leaves like maple leaves continued to fall, floating around him like raindrops. The entire courtyard is very small, less than 20 meters long and wide. A large tree in the middle that is as thick as two people can hug it is the source of these red leaves. Carthage and Garen appeared at the foot of the big tree as if teleporting, and they both looked at the room inside the courtyard at the same time. Kill them! Carthage closed his eyes and just stood there. In an instant, a black figure rushed out of the room. Carthage, I will kill you. Ah! The man roared, as if he was crazy, holding a big axe more than 1 meter long and struck Carthage hard with violent power. The force field concentrated fiercely on the edge of the axe. The loud rumbling sound was like thunder, and as the man jumped out, the entire courtyard seemed to be violently shaken. The ground was shaking, and black traces of airflow were drawn in the air. The man charged towards him as fiercely as a mad bull. The huge axe rotated at high speed and struck Carthage hard on the head. Clang! A few centimeters away from Carthage, a blue scimitar stood firmly in front of the axe. The blade and the axe collided head-on, but there was no trace of damage. Green light flashed in Garen's eyes, and the wolf shadow flickered in front of him. It was as if a giant black illusory wolf suddenly pounced forward. Bang! The man was directly hit by the illusory wolf shadow and flew backwards. His sternum was completely broken, blood spurted from his mouth, and he fell heavily against the wall of the house behind him. He actually didn't break the wall and rolled down directly. I immediately lost my temper. That man is the second elder's grandson who has been missing for many years. Carthage's words immediately made Garen feel cold. He watched Carthage turn around. The guy looked at him with a smile and spoke slowly. I have wanted to kill him for a long time, and it just so happens that you will do it together today. This was the first time Garen saw Carthage smile, but he didn't feel any warmth at all. This guy. He slightly tightened his grip on the handle and retracted the scimitar. No wonder he didn't put in much effort just now, but the other party just flew backwards and died. It was obviously planned in advance. Carthage, this is helping him make up his mind. Cutting off the only way out. He didn't doubt that the other party was lying to him. With their current status, These things could be easily found out with a single check. He was worried about other things. It seems that I underestimated how vicious this guy is. I heard that your main job was a pilot, and then you changed to an energy mechanic? Right, Carthage asked lightly, suppressing the smile on his face. Yes, Garen's face twitched and he replied in a low voice. This guy really found out all about his background. It's great that you still have a younger brother, a lover, and relatives alive. Carthage sighed. It's a pity that my relatives have been dead for a long time. Garen's eyes were cold and he said nothing. This guy was threatening him, a clear threat. Are you interested in regaining your strength as a pilot? At this moment, Carthage's words finally revealed a trace of his true purpose. If I wasn't forced, I would be a heritage-level pilot now, Garen replied in a low voice. That is my pursuit and dream. Carthage smiled mysteriously. During this time, help me kill people. Isn't it enough? Killing the second elder's grandson is not enough to gain the other party's trust? Garen knew that he was walking on a tightrope and would be shattered into pieces if he was not careful. Carthage had hidden too many things. This old monster who had lived for at least 1,000 years had no idea how many tricks he had hidden. But in order to improve himself in the shortest possible time, Garen knew that he had no choice. Good. He replied lowly and firmly. In the following time, it lasted for more than a month. Every day Garen would act together with Carthage, and each time he would go to various places through jump gates, killing, and killing again. Garen felt that his blade was stained with all kinds of blood. When they saw Carthage, many people rushed towards him as if they were father-killing enemies. There were also many people who turned around and ran away as if they had seen a ghost. But it was useless, Garen would kill them one by one. Later, gradually he knew who he had killed. Those are all small sects of skill masters, yes, they are each sect. Under the suppression of Carthage, each small sect is constantly being harvested by galleons. Sometimes they will encounter some stronger sects, but it doesn't matter. These sects are far inferior to the level of the Chixu section. It was easy for Garen to kill them all by himself. There is no such thing as good or evil, and there is no such thing as bloodshed. Galen knew that he must gain the trust of Carthage at this time, otherwise the consequences would be unpredictable. One distant sect was slaughtered one after another, leaving no one alive. Finally, one night, Carthage appeared in front of Garen again. Be well prepared, this is a big operation. Operation, Garen's closed eyes opened slightly, and he discovered that in his gene column, as the number of his killings increased, the black mist was gradually dyed blood red, and seemed to be dissipating. Raising his head now, he stared at Carthage. What kind of opponent? Bluefrost section. Carthage's smiling face looked as ferocious and terrifying as a devil under the dim green light. This moment, Garen's heartbeat seemed to slow down a beat. Mysterious Journey. Author, Gunkai. Chapter 1052. Bluefrost Pie? How can it be? As a medium-sized sect that is even more powerful than the Scarlet Snow sect, when Garen first clashed with the opponent's second-ranked disciple Lan Jixing, he knew that the other party had a top master who would not fall down. There are even disciples who can break through without falling down, let alone the strength of the elders at the first level. And now Carthage actually came to tell him that he wanted to destroy the Bluefrost sect? Are you kidding me? Garen said in a low voice. I don't have time to joke with you. Carthage shook his head. He walked to Garen's side, stood next to a lamp, and stretched out his hand to fiddle with the faint green light. The Bluefrost sect possesses the 1,000-year Blue Jade, which is of great benefit to you and me. This time is a reward for your performance some time ago. Thank you, senior brother. Garen lowered his head. Millennium Blue Jade? What kind of resource is that? Why have I never heard of it? Carthage smiled. You can think of it as an enhanced version of the Hall of Ancestors. The Bluefrost sect only has 3 accumulations in total. As an ice and snow school, the Blue Frost sect has the reputation of having the largest collection of ice and snow secrets. Even if it is the same as Chixyugong, there are also 2 volumes of level exercises. He waved his hand gently and immediately extinguished the 4 surrounding lights. Let's go, don't keep others waiting. Garen stood up, and the 2 men disappeared instantly. The same speed passed by the headquarters building, this time going out along the huge ice door that was opened a gap last time. Since the last time the 3 brats actually forced the giant door open, the door has never been closed again. Instead, it has been allowed to open a gap, allowing the outside world to be seen. The wind and snow drifted in through the gaps in a steady stream, accumulating a thick layer of snow on the ground. Carthage and Garen disappeared in a flash, and were out of the gate in an instant. After galloping on the snow for a few minutes, a black vortex larger than all the previous jump gates soon appeared in Garen's field of vision. Being familiar with the road, the 2 jumped into it. For pilots, this type of jump must be carried out while driving a mecha, but for Naga star mechanics, it is no problem at all. Their physical bodies are terrifyingly powerful. Once again, the colorful rainbow-like scenery kept passing before Garen's eyes. On another extremely distant blue planet, in a deserted yellow desert, a black vortex emerged out of thin air, and 2 figures shot out from the middle, landing steadily on the desert ground. The desert is golden, and all around you can see endless golden color. The wind and sand are blowing, but what is blowing is an extremely hot wind, close to 30 or 40 degrees Celsius. As soon as the 2 people appeared, they shot towards a certain direction in the desert at high speed. Carthage looked just like an ordinary wealthy young man out for an outing. He was leisurely and comfortable, with a plain complexion. He was dressed in white and stood out in the desert. Garen, on the other hand, was much stronger, with a blue scimitar on his waist. He changed into a long black suit, covered the lower half of his face with a mask, and his whole body aura was also covered. The 2 were galloping through the desert, and soon a small group of people appeared in front of them, seemingly waiting for them. This group of people is not large in number, but all of them are extremely powerful. Their lowest strength actually has resonance level, and most of them are inheritance level. In addition, each of them looks strange and ferocious, making them scary. "Is everyone here?" Carthage asked calmly as soon as he landed. "General, we're all here." A tall, thin woman with a bamboo pole stood up and replied in a low voice. "Shiyu, your mission is to deal with those fleeing chaotic elements. Especially those talented weapon masters, the top 3 cannot be spared," Carthage arranged calmly. "Yes," the woman with a bamboo pole named Shiyu responded fiercely. "The rest of you can move freely. After this is over, I want everyone to hand over 3 blood beads to my junior brother as a meeting gift," Carthage ordered calmly. "Please don't worry, General," a group of people replied in unison. Many eyes fell on Garen behind Carthage. Obviously, the junior brother Carthage mentioned should be this one. Garen's heart moved slightly. Although he didn't know what the blood bead was, as a top genius, his performance in the Scarlet Snow sect was undoubtedly noticed by Carthage. Only those with talent are valuable. The rate of progress is extremely astonishing. It can be said that he, Galleon, is the top genius of the Scarlet Snow sect in hundreds of years. This title should be given to him, not to Carthage. After all, this guy is an old guy who is rare to see in 1,000 years. As a master who does not fall down, he is still hiding in a small sect like Chixyu section. I don't know what his intentions are. Wait 3 hours and launch a surprise attack. Carthage waved his hand and finally set the time. This group of masters who didn't know where they came from immediately took a break and took a good rest. Their movements were well trained. Obviously, this was not the first time they had experienced this. Carthage sat cross-legged, closed his eyes and rested his mind. Jia Long also suppressed the doubts in his heart and sat down cross-legged to practice the Chi Snow Kung Fu. However, he was in the desert at this time, and the surrounding temperature was hot, which was not suitable for practicing Jixia Kung Fu. After sitting there for a long time without moving, Jia Long had no choice but to start to organize other thoughts. Suddenly he remembered the secret book of ice and snow that came from the hands of the eldest Princess Annie, Bing Kongji. Because of the incident in Carthage, he has never had time to rest and recuperate his cultivation. But now that I have rare free time, I can just take a look at this book of ice coffins. After all, it is a heritage level skill, no matter how bad it is, it won't be any worse. What's more, the practice requirements mentioned above do not limit environmental conditions. Anyway, nothing happened. Garen sat on the sand, closed his eyes, and began to recall the secret book of the ice coffin that was recorded in the mark of the energy weapon. This secret martial art is very interesting. First, you need to release your own cold energy, condense something like an ice coffin around you, completely wrap yourself up, and isolate yourself from the outside world. Then, another special structure of ice coffin is continuously condensed in it. This special structure of ice coffin can greatly refine the quality of its own cold air, until you can cultivate something called the heart of ice. Although the name is very tacky, according to the description in the cheat book, this thing is very abnormal and terrifyingly powerful. As long as it is practiced, it can greatly refine one's own cold energy and promote one's own cold energy to further improve. It can be said that this secret book is a complete auxiliary secret martial arts. It is a secret book of Jixia Kung Fu that Annie spent a lot of time to select specifically to assist Garen. Garen just followed the steps described in the secret book to condense the cold air and ice coffin. In less than 10 minutes, a solid layer of ice was formed around him, completely sealing him. Carthage just glanced at this side casually without paying any attention to the inquiry. The others were practicing on their own and didn't even look at this side. The wind and sand are getting louder and louder, and the temperature is getting higher and hotter as the sun shines above our heads. But a large area around Garan was still extremely cold. Garen left a trace of his energy as a warning, and devoted all the rest of his attention to the practice of Bing Kongji. His current Jixia Gong is still at the 11th level of resonance level double moon, and has not broken through the inheritance level. Generally speaking, from this stage to the inheritance level, one needs to hone his character, achieve emotional stability, and not be easily moved by external objects. Only with the state of mind and the accumulation of huge amounts of energy and skill can the 6th red glow be condensed and enter the 12th level of the red snow skill. At this point, the ancestral hall will not be opened easily, because the inheritance level requires too much skill. It is very likely that after a dozen people go there, the energy accumulated in the ancestral hall will be completely gone. Therefore, the ice hell is generally open at this stage. To accumulate skills, you can only rely on hard work and hard work. Generally, it takes at least 10 years to reach the resonance level to the inheritance level. This is a normal accumulation, but if there are adventures and the like, the fastest can be entered in 4 or 5 years. For example, Carthage is such a genius in disguise. But Garen knew his situation, and his state of mind was already stable enough. As long as he accumulated enough energy, he should be able to achieve a breakthrough. What is the threshold of state of mind for others is nothing to him. A group of people sat cross-legged in the desert, with the sun shining brightly. One of them was radiating cold air, and his whole body was condensed into a block of ice. No one spoke, no one even looked here. More than 10 people sat here like sculptures, motionless. Garen felt the flow and circulation of the ice coffin technique that was rapidly forming in his body. These cycles soon formed a small transparent ice coffin near his Jixia skill. Whenever Jixia's power comes in or out, it will naturally pass through this layer of ice coffin and be filtered. The impurities will be eliminated by the ice coffin, and although the remaining skill will be less, it will be purer and purer. I have become a beginner so quickly. Sure enough, my innate abilities are still working. As long as you understand the principles and practice a little bit, you can get started. Garen sighed in his heart. This reminded him of his past in the world of secret martial arts. Situation. At that time, any technique for which you had no threshold, once you understood the principles, you could directly use your potential to master it. So what now? Jia Long admitted that he believed that it was because of the inner cold prison peacock kung fu, and that he had practiced Chi Snow kung fu for so long, so he had a clear understanding of all aspects of the theory, so maybe he could give it a try. As soon as this idea sprouted, I couldn't suppress it. It's not that he hasn't used the potential Chixia kung fu in the past 2 years, but it's useless. There is another crucial factor that restricts the improvement of secret weapons, and that is computing power. Therefore, Chixia Gong cannot be improved and can only wait for the gradual growth of computing power and simultaneous improvement. But Bing Kong Ji is different now. This thing is just an auxiliary skill, and the principle is not difficult. It mainly relies on water grinding skills, constantly condensing small ice coffins with special structures in the body, accumulating a certain number of layers, filtering layer by layer, and finally reaching the point of purifying the skill. It can be said that the ice coffin is not a rare skill. It is relatively common in the ice school. After all, it is something that can be bought on the market. Any can give it away, so naturally it will not be very precious. It can only be regarded as a third-rate secret martial arts, purely auxiliary. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Mysterious Journey. Author, Gunkai. Chapter 1053. Like Chixia Gong, according to the classification of secret martial arts, it should belong to the first-class special secret martial arts. If you practice it alone, you will be a first-class master in the secret martial arts world at most. But if you combine it with the practice of consciousness and calculation power and absorb a large number of powerful resources, the future will be brighter. It far exceeds the scope of the secret martial arts itself. Garen was thinking about his own skills while circulating the ice coffin pole to expel the impurities in his skills. According to the classification, Ice Coffin G should belong to the second-rate level of the secret martial arts world. It is a more popular secret martial arts. Looking back carefully, Garen discovered that senior sister Renee, Alolan, and Carthage all seemed to have practiced it. This secret martial art is used to filter one's own skills. Because the purity of their skills seems to be stronger than mine, the greatest use of this purity is to nourish their own computing power, which can improve their computing power and cultivation level faster. Ice Coffin G is a skill that is easy to learn but difficult to master. Many people stay on the second level. It is just used to filter out impurities in the skill. It is quite good at this time. Carthage's voice suddenly reached Garen's ears. Seeing as you are just getting started, I advise you not to spend too much energy on it. This skill is just a water mill. The first level is okay, it only takes 80 years, and the second level is 160 years. The third level actually takes thousands of years. With so much time, people who have already mastered other skills have already mastered it. Who would be willing to practice this thing? So usually we just reach the second level. Carthage suggested. Thank you, senior brother, for your advice. Garen responded in the ice coffin. Isn't this kind of water grinding work just suitable for increasing your potential points? When Jia Long heard this, his heart suddenly moved slightly. There are still hundreds of potential points, but it would be too wasteful to use them all to improve physical fitness. The key is to use them to improve abilities, and techniques like Bing Kong Ji gave Garen a lot of inspiration. If I can find a lot of secret martial arts superimposition practices that require hard work, I can maximize my advantages and make up for the huge gap in time accumulation with those old monsters as much as possible. Maybe I can also improve my computing power. Rapid improvement. This thought came together in my heart and I couldn't stop it immediately. But before that, we have to try it first to see if this ice coffin can be successful. Garen immediately closed his eyes and his gaze stopped on his attribute bar in the darkness. No Siwalin Strength 24.1, Agility 12.1, Constitution 24.8, Intelligence 8.1, Potential 50,500, and 30% Soul Limit 40. There are still 505 potential points which should be enough. He looked at the skill bar again and quickly found the newly formed ice coffin pole among a lot of skills. Secret technique of the energy mechanic, ice coffin G, getting started. The secret weapon of the ice system can filter the ice and snow system skills. There are 3 levels in total. It is said that the highest level can filter 100% of the impurities in the skills and reach the state of purification. Improve body qualifications. The first level requires 80 years of hard work, the second level requires 160 years, and the third level requires 1,600 years. In total, it will take at least 1,840 years to complete. Garen's eyes just stayed on this skill for 3 consecutive seconds, and the potential points suddenly began to change. Suddenly, 2 potential points were lost under Garen's painful gaze. Okay, it's exactly what I thought. The laws of talent and abilities in this world and the world of secret martial arts are still the same. Ice Coffin G belongs to the second-rate secret martial arts, so it only takes 2 points of the potential of the intermediate secret martial arts to forcibly upgrade it to 1 level. Bing Kong Ji instantly went from the entry level to the first level. Garen suddenly looked inside and could clearly see that the ice coffin in his body seemed to become more complicated and more transparent. Come again, since Garen came to this world, he has been relying on his past accumulation to move forward, rarely relying on his talents and abilities. It can be said that he has really suffered a lot, made many detours, and realized that he can become stronger normally. There are so many things that need to be paid for. Now that the potential points can be used for great purposes, he was pleasantly surprised again. He stared at the ice coffin pole for 3 seconds, and his potential points suddenly dropped by 2 points again. And the ice coffin suddenly changed from the first level to the second level. Almost in an instant, Garen directly saw a large number of tiny ice coffins suddenly emerge from his body, densely suspended in the blood in his body, flowing slowly along the blood. These ice coffins were extremely small, even the capillaries. It can be drilled in at all ends, and the coldness in all the blood is continuously purified, which in turn slowly improves the entire body's physique. Sure enough, Garen sighed in his heart. No wonder so many people choose to practice this relatively popular auxiliary exercise. It turns out that it still has this effect, slowly improving physical fitness. This effect is not noticeable in a short time, but over time, the accumulated effects are powerful. According to his calculations, this slow transformation and purification, as long as it lasts for 2 years, can improve his physique by about a bit. It will take more than 100 years to complete the second level, which is indeed very cost-effective. At the very least, an energy master can live for hundreds of years. It takes more than 100 years to cultivate to the second level and slowly improve his physique. In the end, he can improve and improve for hundreds of years. He can definitely reach the limit of a skill. The second level has such an effect, which makes Garen look forward to the third level even more. As an auxiliary skill, Bing Kong Ji does not require much consciousness and calculation power, which is also its greatest advantage. Therefore, Galleons can directly use potential points to increase it. Come again. His eyes focused on the ice coffin again. Suddenly, this time, 3 points of potential were lost. Apparently, the innate ability identified this secret weapon as a high-level secret weapon at this stage. But for the current Galleons, 2 points and 3 points are the same, drizzle. The icon of Bing Kong Ji blurred for a moment, and then quickly returned to normal. This time the change seems a bit big. Ice Coffin Ultimate, the third level of Dachan, obtains the Heart of Ice, 100% filtering and purifying ice system skills, and has great resistance to hallucination and hypnosis attacks, substantial assistance in improving physical and mental health, 1 point per year for 20 consecutive years. 1 point every year. Garen was overjoyed. What kind of concept is this? Improving one's physical fitness and intelligence by 1 point every year. This is simply extremely terrifying. Let's not talk about physique, let's just talk about intelligence. His current numerical value is 8.1, which is already considered a genius level figure among energy masters. If he still improves his intelligence a little bit on the basis of hard training every year, then how far can his qualifications reach? Okay, let's go. Suddenly Carthage's voice sounded in Garen's ears, pulling him out of his thoughts. Garen took one last look at his Chixyakung. As he expected, Chi Sui Gong had undergone new changes at this time. Cold Realm Red Snow Technique, 11th Double Moon level. The coldness is strengthened to the 3rd level, the sharpness is strengthened to the 3rd level, and the purity is strengthened to the 3rd level. The cold enhancement and sharpness enhancement are both obtained when absorbing that trace of inheritance power, and the purity should be obtained by the Heart of Ice. Garen gathered his thoughts, spread his outer ice coffin with a crash, and stood up. At this time, everyone else sitting cross-legged in the desert also stood up, patted their robes, and looked at Carthage. It was obvious that he was the unified commander. Galen also set his sights on Carthage. Prepare the jump gate. Tree fish. Good. Watching the jump gate being gradually released, Carthage narrowed his eyes slightly and remained silent, as if waiting for something. Time passed slowly, and no one showed any signs of impatience. For mechanics, their long lifespans gave them strong patience. Suddenly, a dazzling golden light suddenly lit up in the desert in the distance. Walk. When Carthage saw this golden light, he immediately curled up his lips. Swish swish swish. One after another figures quickly shot into the black vortex of the jump gate, and suddenly only Garen and Carthage were left. Carthage glanced at Garen, and the two slowly walked into the jump gate one after the other. Amidst the subtle noise of jumping, the two people appeared above a huge white desert city, floating in the air and overlooking the doomsday-like scene below. In the huge crescent-shaped white city, black behemoths that are 20 to 30 meters tall are wreaking havoc crazily. Huge rumbling crashes and the sound of buildings collapsing were heard one after another everywhere. Looking down from a high altitude, buildings are collapsing everywhere in the city, and dust and sand are rising high. Figures of blue-clothed figures besieging the giant beasts can be vaguely seen around them, but it is to no avail. These giant beasts, like chimpanzees, are agile and are accidentally caught. If you hit it, you will either die or be injured. The two of them were floating in the air, looking at the tragedy below. People in the city were running away, screaming and crying. Desperate voices came one after another, and screams and crazy roars occasionally sounded. But most of them were crushed to death by the buildings that collapsed at will when the giant beasts were raging, without saying a word. There are black spots everywhere in the entire White Crescent city. Around the black spots, you can vaguely see the sandy ground stained red with a lot of blood. Like patches of spots. A figure suddenly flashed beside Carthage. It was a middle-aged man in blue. His face was covered with blood. One of his arms seemed to have just been cut off, and there were still fresh blood clots remaining. The most important thing is that this man is still surging with the restless energy from the battle that he just finished. Another one who doesn't fall down. Garen's heart skipped a beat, feeling the level of this person. Where are the elders here? Carthage asked casually. 3 died and 2 were captured alive, the middle-aged man replied calmly. The guardian here needs your body to deal with it yourself. Don't worry. It's already being solved. Carthage showed a slightly meaningful smile. Garen was horrified when he heard this. Could it be that this undegenerated Carthage was not his true form? What he saw from the space-time diagram was not comprehensive. He was fairly clear about the development events around him, but there was nothing he could do about the rest. If this is really the case, then this person is too scary. Garen's heart trembled slightly. Even if he is not demoted, he is just a clone of the opponent. So how strong is Carthage's true body? Unreduced is the 7th level of the power level. The guardians of the Bluefrost sect are definitely stronger than unreduced. They are at least the 8th level. If they can kill the 8th level guardian, then the strength of this Carthage is. Garen didn't dare to think about it. The 9th level was close to the level of the Eternal Mover. Such a highly powerful person is simply not comparable to the levels he has been exposed to before. Perhaps only the original form of the 9-headed Dragon King of the Void came to compare. Wait a moment, just in time to get something as a small gift for my genius junior brother. Carthage glanced at Garen with a smile. The middle-aged man bowed his head respectfully and stood motionless on one side. The three of them were suspended in the sky, and in the city below, a high-level battle had broken out. Some masters who had gone into seclusion returned, and the cold frost gradually stopped the rampage of the giant beasts. Mysterious Journey. Author, Gunkai. Chapter 1054. Some resonance level and inheritance level disciples took action. Garen also saw a blue pole star and another beautiful fair woman leading two groups of disciples. They quickly killed several black giant apes and quickly calmed down the chaotic situation. How dare you attack our Bluefrost faction headquarters? You will die when the faction leader comes back. The fair woman shouted loudly through the loudspeaker, and her voice immediately stabilized the chaotic situation. Many people rushed here quickly and gathered into a group. More and more masters of the Bluefrost sect gathered together and formed a huge force, killing more than a dozen black giant apes in a few strokes. Dragon Vein freezing energy. Frost is coming. Suddenly a voice sounded from the ground. Under the leadership of Senior Sister and Blue Pole Star, everyone in the Bluefrost sect actually formed a huge circular formation, emitting blue cold air that reached into the sky. The huge cold air actually formed a terrifying blue dragon head hundreds of meters high in mid-air, and the ferocious dragon's mouth fiercely bit at the Carthage trio. Before the terrifying force field arrived, a severe cold air began to spread upwards from the feet of the three of them. Garen only felt the eyes of the huge blue dragon head staring at him, and a terrifying power that far exceeded the level of immortality volleyed and stopped him. A large amount of ice began to spread upward from his feet, over his legs, over his lower body, and quickly froze above his abdomen. He was horrified, but at this moment, no amount of skill or power could stop this terrifying freezing air from freezing. As soon as all the power came into contact with this freezing air, it instantly disappeared into nothing, as if it had never appeared. In less than a few seconds, half of his body was frozen into the ice. 8-level inscription array. It's interesting. Carthage was also being frozen, but there was a sarcastic smile on his lips. Slowly, he raised one hand and grabbed it straight towards the sky. Storm. Buzz. In an instant, the sky turned dark. Countless black clouds swirled to form a huge vortex of several kilometers, and the center of the vortex seemed like a dark tunnel leading to another world. There was a roar and explosion, and suddenly, a big hand with a width of more than 1,000 meters poked out from it. The big hand had fair skin and the surface was covered with fine silver scales. He opened his palm and pressed down gently. The blue dragon shattered, as if it had been crushed alive, and exploded, instantly turning into countless ice fragments. There was no sound, just endless vibrations. Garen just felt an arm like a sky pillar fall from in front of him and hit the ground hard. All the light in front of him was blocked by the arm. He could even see palm-sized pieces of silver on the arm very close. The scales are densely packed, exuding a hint of sulfur. The whole arm felt like a huge wall falling from the sky. The strong airflow centered on the arm and exploded in all directions, causing ripples to appear in the force field all over Garen's body. There was a crunching sound, and the huge arm shattered like glass, completely shattering into countless silver fragments and dissipating in mid-air. The black clouds dispersed, and there was a mess below. Garen suppressed the fear in his heart and looked down. At least half of the buildings in the entire Crescent City were destroyed. Under the destruction of this palm, the people of the Bluefrost sect formed below also suffered heavy casualties. An evil smile appeared at the corner of Carthage's mouth. His originally ordinary face now gave people a terrifying and deep feeling under this temperament. "Go ahead." He spoke calmly. Four blood-red figures suddenly appeared next to him. They were four people in blood-red robes who were hiding somewhere. The ends of their robes were constantly scattering shadows like fragments and scattered downwards, but the strange thing was that the robes continued to break, but there is no loss at all, it is still the original length. The four bloody robes shot straight down without any words. Whoosh! Garen tightened his grip on the handle of the knife. Just now, he didn't feel the presence of the four figures at all. He stood alone at high altitude, watching four bloody robes rushing into the crowd below, a completely one-sided massacre. The seriously injured senior sister of the Bluefrost sect and Blue Pole Star each stopped a blood-robed one, but the remaining two blood-robed ones were unbeatable. Almost any attack that landed on them would pass by in a series, like a phantom. Anyone they pass by will be ignited with bloody flames, and in an instant they will turn into a white skeleton and fall to the ground. Garen Carthage's voice reached Garen's ears from the side. Garen turned his head and looked at this mysterious and powerful man. "The Blue Pole Star is yours." Carthage smiled slightly, and a red cross faintly appeared between his eyebrows. "Yes." Garen lowered his head. At this moment, a similar red cross shot into the void in front of him, floating and rotating. Garen reached out and grabbed the cross, gently wrapped it around his arm, and tied it with the black chain that came with it as a rope, forming a black circle. "This is a sign of your own people. You are not allowed to kill each other if you encounter them. Clear." Garen took a deep breath and flew downwards. The flying boots under his feet spurted out, creating two long white strips of light. The formation of the Bluefrost sect below had been crushed by the huge hand just now, and was severely damaged. Hundreds of people were almost killed by the four blood-robed men at this time. Only a few people, including Lanjixing and the senior sister, were covered in blood and were still fighting. Snapped. Garen landed lightly among the ruins of the building, with solid stones and debris beneath his feet. The solid touch spread along the soles of the feet, immediately offsetting some of the previous unreal feelings. He lowered his head and picked up a handful of stones on the ground. The white stone fragments were scratchy and stained with a lot of white lime, which was very hard and very hot. Sighing, Garen turned around and walked towards several people from the Bluefrost faction who were still resisting. The four blood-robed men were currently surrounding the remaining 5 members of the Bluefrost section. They did not make a move or let them leave. They seemed to be waiting for Garen to come over. Quickly walking into the encirclement, Garen felt a biting chill emanating from the Bluefrost sect members as soon as he got closer. "Garen, the Lord said that it is up to you to solve the problem of Blue Pole Star." A man in blood robe chuckled and said, "Don't let down the Lord's good intentions." Garen was shocked. This person actually called out his identity directly. This is to completely force him to leave the Energy Master camp. There is no way out. He glanced at the blood-robed man calmly and said coldly, "Anyway, now that Carthage is suppressing them in the sky, their own people cannot kill each other. You don't need to care about my affairs." "That's not a bad tone." The man in blood robe sneered and stopped talking. Lanjixing and others over there had a slight reaction when they heard the name. Lanjixing's eyes widened, as if he was confused, shocked, and couldn't believe it. The only person named Garen who had a grudge against him was only one person, and this person should not be associated with the deathly man in black robes in front of him. When Garen's gaze shifted to him, Lanjixing hadn't fully reacted yet and was still blocking his sister. His only brother died in the void battlefield, and his remaining sister must not let anything happen to him again. No matter who he is. If you can kill him, the Lord said that I can let you live. Another old voice in the blood robe came out, and his words were spoken to Blue Pole Star. Kill him. A hint of hope suddenly appeared in Lan Jixing's eyes, which were almost desperate. Brother, the sister behind him grabbed his hand and cried in a soft voice. Don't go. They lied to you. Do I need to lie to you? Under the superposition of 4 times the weakening force field, even if you are not demoted, you will only have the peak strength of the inheritance level. Killing you is like killing an insect. Do I need to lie to you? The old blood-robed man said coldly. Road. I'll do it. The senior sister took a step forward and said loudly. I'll take his place. No, the old blood-robed man sneered. Despicable. Blue Pole Star was seriously injured and lost blood. He may not even have half of his body's abilities. In addition, your force field is weakened, senior sister said sternly. Come to me if you can. The winner must do whatever it takes. History is written by the winner. It doesn't matter whether it's despicable or anything else. You only have 2 choices now. One is to fight our junior brother Garen in a one-on-one fight, and the other is to die. The first person to speak, Shui Gong, sneered and spoke. As expected of the Blue Frost sect, they are indeed famous for their unity. At this time, they still don't forget to stand up for their junior brothers. They are truly worthy of being a senior sister. I like this kind of temperament. You're a maggot that hides its head and shows its tail. If we fight one-on-one, I can kill you casually. The senior sister turned pale and cursed fiercely. Okay, let's start as soon as possible. Garen took a step forward, and the scarlet crusaders tied to his arm suddenly lit up with red fluorescence. He felt as if he had walked into a thicker liquid environment, and the air around him everywhere seemed to be filled with thick invisible liquid, hindering the speed of his movements. Obviously this is the so-called quadruple weakening force field. Garen did not feel it had a weakening effect on him. It was obviously the effect of the Red Cross. He slowly grasped the handle of the knife. Since the last time he used up the blue fire, the magic sword Sun Yao found that it could be filled with other flames, so he filled it with some ordinary fire at will, and then it became Carthage. The shape I saw only had red flames, no blue. Moreover, the quality of ordinary flame seems to be insufficient and can only burn on the tip of the knife. At this time, there is no need to hide one's own sunlight demonic sword. The power of this demonic sword has disappeared due to the flame, and it has simply become a hard and sharp blade, waiting for the next recharge. Hiss. Yao slowly unsheathed the scabbard and was held in Garen's hands before throwing away the scabbard. Garen stared intently at the blue pole star opposite, and an invisible double moon level force field burst out from his body. It's you. It turns out it's really you. Blue pole star faintly discerned the nature of Garen's technique from Garen's movement force field. He smiled miserably and whispered. I know I won't survive. But my sister is still young. She has only just reached the 3rd level. Please. Garen felt sad. He was a master who was not downgraded. He definitely had a trump card. Even if he fought against him in a semi-disabled state, he would not necessarily lose. But now, I will use all my wealth and my life in exchange for your promise. Blue pole star stood there without moving, but the message fell directly into Garen's ears. Spare her life. I will give you my inherited power. The power of inheritance. Garen took a deep breath. At the beginning, an ordinary inheritance power gave him great benefits. If it were replaced by a non-degraded inheritance power, the benefits would be unimaginable. Promise him. Suddenly Carthage's voice appeared in Garen's ears, making his heart tense. No longer hesitating, Garen gritted his teeth and nodded. I promise you. Boom. In the distance, the largest landmark building of the Blue Frost sect, the aerial stone carousel, was hung by more than a dozen giant apes and fell down. A roar marked the headquarters of the Bluefrost sect, a medium-sized sect that is one of the best among the weapon masters. Completely fallen. Come on, kill me. Lan Jixing smiled miserably. He knew that no matter whether he won or lost, he would not be allowed to live. The opponent's strength was so strong, his power was terrifying, and his plans were so ambitious that even if he was profound, it feels shuddering. Even if I don't fall down the grade. Even if he wins, he will definitely be silenced. But his sister didn't know anything. As long as her memory was washed away, there was still a glimmer of hope for survival. Walking slowly over, Garen was not blocked by any force field. The two were less than 5 meters apart, and he could already see the will to die in Lan Polestar's eyes. He didn't know how the other party judged that he could trust him, but this choice was undoubtedly the best for him now. Let's do it. The man in blood robe next to him sneered.